The cemetery was quiet that morning. A soft wind moved through the trees and dry leaves brushed against the path as a black car stopped near the iron gate. The driver got out first and opened the back door carefully. A tall man stepped out dressed in a dark suit, holding a small bouquet of white lilies. His face showed the kind of sadness that doesn't fade with time. Every Thursday he came here, always at the same hour, always alone. The guards and the workers at the cemetery had grown used to his visits. They knew who he was, the man who owned half the city, the one whose picture often appeared in newspapers. But here at his son's grave, he wasn't a billionaire. He was just a father still trying to make peace with a loss that had left his heart empty. He walked slowly along the path, past rows of gray stones until he reached one marble headstone covered with fresh flowers and small toys. His son had been only 15 when the accident happened. Life had given him everything but time. The man knelt down, placing the lilies beside the grave. For a long moment he said nothing. He just stood there in silence, watching the sunlight fall over his son's name. But then something caught his eye. A small figure was sitting near the grave, someone he hadn't seen before. It was a boy, thin and barefoot, wearing an old shirt that hung loosely from his shoulders. He seemed lost in thought, his small hands holding something carefully, a wildflower he must have picked nearby. The man frowned. Who was this child? And why was he sitting by his son's grave? He stepped closer. The boy didn't notice him at first. He was whispering softly, as if talking to the grave. The man's voice broke the silence. "What are you doing here, son?" he asked in a low, firm tone. The boy jumped up in surprise. He looked scared and tried to hide the flower behind his back. "I'm sorry, sir," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to do anything wrong. This is my son's resting place," the man said. "Why are you here?" The boy hesitated. "I just came to say hi," he murmured, his eyes fixed on the ground. "To say hi?" The man sounded confused. "Do you even know who's buried here?" The boy nodded slowly. "Yes, he was my friend." Those words made the man freeze. Friend? His son had gone to an expensive private school, surrounded by children of wealthy families. This boy didn't look like he belonged to that world. His clothes were torn and his shoes were missing. For a moment, the man thought the boy must be lying. He turned to the caretaker who stood a few steps away. "Do you know this child?" The old caretaker nodded. "Yes, sir. He comes here every week, always before you arrive. He just sits quietly for a while, talks a little, and leaves. Never causes trouble." The billionaire's eyes narrowed. "Every week?" "Yes, sir. Every single week." The man looked back at the boy, who was now standing nervously beside the grave. There was something about the way he looked at the headstone, something gentle and honest that stopped the man from getting angry. He didn't know why, but a strange feeling touched his heart. Maybe it was the sincerity in the boy's voice, or maybe it was because for the first time in years someone else remembered his son too. "What's your name?" the man asked softly. The boy told him. "And how did you know my son?" "We went to the same school," the boy replied. "He used to sit next to me sometimes. He shared his lunch with me when I didn't have any. He said we were friends." The man's heart trembled at those words. His son had never mentioned this boy. He remembered his son as cheerful, full of kindness, always trying to make everyone around him smile. Hearing that he had shared food with a poor boy made the father both proud and heartbroken. The boy looked up shyly. "I come here every week to bring him flowers. I pick them on the way." The man felt his throat tighten. "Why do you do that?" The boy shrugged. "Because he was the only one who didn't laugh at me. He told me that one day he'd help me study and buy shoes for me. But then, he never came back." The silence that followed was heavy. The wind blew through the trees again, and the man could only stare at the small wildflower lying on the grave. Something inside him cracked open, a small piece of the wall he had built around his pain. He wanted to say something, to ask more, but the boy quickly turned away. "I should go now, sir," he said quietly. "The caretaker said it's okay if I visit sometimes. I didn't mean to upset you." Before the man could stop him, the boy walked off down the path, his bare feet brushing against the gravel. The billionaire stood there for a long time, watching the small figure disappear through the gate. For the first time in years, his thoughts were not on business deals or investments. They were on a poor child who brought wildflowers to his son's grave every week. That night he couldn't sleep. The image of the boy kept coming back to him, the thin hands holding a flower, the shy voice, the way he said, "He was my friend." It echoed in his head like a whisper from the past. He sat in his study, staring at an old photograph on his desk, his son smiling, standing beside a group of children during a charity event years ago, and then his heart skipped a beat. There in the corner of the picture was the same boy, smaller and thinner, but unmistakably him. He was right. They really had known each other. The next morning, the billionaire told his driver to take him back to the cemetery. He waited near the gate, hoping the boy would appear again. Hours passed, but he didn't come. The caretaker said the boy usually came early in the morning before school. So the man returned the next day, this time earlier. The sun had just begun to rise when he saw the boy walking up the hill, carrying a small bunch of flowers in one hand and a torn school bag in the other. The man stayed hidden behind a tree and watched as the boy cleaned the leaves off the grave, placed the flowers down and sat cross-legged beside it. He whispered something softly, almost like he was talking to a real person. "I miss you," the boy said. "School's hard without you. But I'm trying, just like you told me. I even passed my test this week." The billionaire felt his chest tighten. He had never heard such honest words spoken in such a simple way. They cut deeper than anything else ever could. He stepped forward quietly, and the boy looked up, startled again. "You came back," the boy said, standing quickly. "Yes," the man said. "I wanted to see you." The boy hesitated, unsure if he was in trouble. "Don't worry," the man added softly. "I'm not angry." The boy relaxed a little. "I just come here to talk to him. It helps me feel better." The man nodded. "You must have been very close." "He was the only one who talked to me like I was someone," the boy said. "Most of the other kids didn't, but he said I was smart and could do anything if I tried." The billionaire felt tears welling up in his eyes. His son had been more compassionate than he ever realized. "Do your parents know you come here?" he asked. "My grandmother knows," the boy replied. "She says he was an angel who looked after me when I had no one. That's why I thank him every week." The man couldn't speak for a moment. He had spent years hiding from his pain, thinking he was the only one who remembered his son. But here was this child who had been quietly keeping his son's memory alive in the most innocent way. "Do you need anything?" the man asked suddenly. "Shoes, books?" The boy shook his head. "No, sir. Thank you. I don't need anything. I just want to keep coming here. Please don't stop me." The billionaire felt something shift inside him. The boy wasn't asking for money or favors. He just wanted permission to love his friend's memory. He nodded slowly. "You can come whenever you like." The boy smiled faintly. "Thank you, sir." Then he picked up his bag and walked down the hill again, leaving the man alone by the grave. But this time the billionaire didn't feel alone. There was something about the boy's presence that had warmed the cold emptiness inside him. As he stood there, he whispered to the grave, "You never told me about him. You gave your kindness to someone who needed it most." The air felt lighter around him. The sound of birds filled the trees, and for the first time in years, the man felt like his son wasn't completely gone. He got back into his car quietly, watching the boy disappear into the distance. Something deep inside him knew this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. He didn't understand it yet, but fate had brought that boy into his life for a reason that would soon change both of their worlds forever. The next Thursday morning, the billionaire found himself waking up earlier than usual. The thought of that boy had stayed in his mind all week. It was strange. He had met thousands of people in his life, yet it was that small barefoot child who had somehow reached a place deep in his heart that money could never touch. He had always believed grief was something to be managed privately, quietly. For years, he'd handled it like a business problem, by burying himself in work, keeping his mind busy so he wouldn't have to feel the pain. But ever since he met that boy, something had changed. It was like a door he had locked long ago had been pushed open. He sat in the back seat of his car as it moved through the quiet streets. The city was just waking up, shops still closed, and the first rays of sunlight turning the tall glass buildings gold. His driver looked at him through the mirror and said softly, "The cemetery again, sir?" He nodded. "Yes, and go early this time." When they reached, the gatekeeper greeted him with a polite nod. The man walked straight to his son's grave, expecting to find it just as he had left it. But the sight stopped him halfway down the path. The boy was already there, sitting on the grass, talking softly to the grave like last time. He was wearing the same old shirt, but this time he had a small bag beside him and a notebook open on his lap. The billionaire stayed still for a moment, just watching. The boy looked completely at peace there, as if the graveyard wasn't a sad place to him. But somewhere he found comfort. He finally stepped forward. The boy heard the footsteps and turned around quickly. When he saw the man, he stood up, brushing off the dust from his knees. "You came again, sir," he said quietly. "I told you I would," the man replied. "Do you come here before school every day?" The boy shook his head. "Only on Thursdays." "That's the day your son used to bring me lunch at school." The man's chest tightened. "He brought you lunch?" The boy nodded with a small smile. "He said food tastes better when you share it. Sometimes he'd bring extra just for me. He said his mom used to make him do it, but I think he liked doing it too." The man smiled faintly. His wife had indeed taught their son to share, though she had passed away years before. He could almost hear her voice again, gentle but firm. "Be kind even when nobody is watching." "Do you remember him from school?" the man asked, his voice softer now. "Yes," the boy said, opening his notebook and pulling out an old, folded picture. "I have this." He handed it carefully to the man. It was a worn-out photograph, creased from years of being folded and unfolded. It showed a group of children at a school event, all smiling, holding up small trophies. His son was there in the middle, cheerful as always, and next to him the same boy, younger, thinner, but unmistakably him. The man stared at the photo for a long time. His throat felt dry. He remembered that day faintly. It had been a school charity fair. He had sent money for the event but hadn't attended himself because of work. Now he wished he had. Maybe if he had gone that day, he would have known about this friendship sooner. "He gave me this photo," the boy said softly. "Said I should keep it to remember him by. I didn't know he'd leave so soon." The man took a deep breath, trying to hold his emotions together. "He never told me about you," he said almost to himself. The boy looked down. "Maybe he didn't think you'd care." The words hit the man hard. He knew they weren't said to hurt him. They were simply honest. Still, they stung because they were true. He had been so busy chasing wealth that he had missed out on knowing the small details of his son's heart. The boy knelt again beside the grave and placed another wildflower there. "He said he wanted to be like you when he grew up. I think he really loved you." The man looked away quickly, pretending to fix his tie, but his eyes had turned wet. He asked quietly, "Where do you live?" The boy hesitated, unsure if he should answer. "Near the old bus station, sir. With my grandmother." "Do you go to school every day?" "I try to," the boy said. "Sometimes I can't because I have to work." "What kind of work?" "I shine shoes at the market," the boy said simply. "It's not much, but it helps buy medicine for my grandmother." The man didn't know what to say. He had built skyscrapers, owned companies, made millions with a single deal. But here was a child who was proud of earning coins to buy medicine. Something about it made him feel small. He asked gently, "How old are you?" 12, the boy said. "But I'll be 13 soon." The man nodded slowly. His son would have been 16 that year. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, the morning sunlight falling over the marble stone, the wildflowers and the boy's old shoes. Finally, the man broke the silence. "Would you like me to drop you to school today?" he asked. The boy shook his head quickly. "No, sir, I walk." "It's not far." "Still," the man insisted. "You shouldn't be walking barefoot." The boy smiled shyly. "I don't mind. I'll save money for shoes soon." The man wanted to argue, but he stopped himself. The boy's pride reminded him so much of his son. He had the same quiet confidence, the same sense of dignity. When the boy started to leave, the man said softly, "Can I see you again next week?" The boy nodded. "Yes, sir. I'll be here." He turned and ran down the path, disappearing behind the trees. The man stood there holding the photo the boy had given him. He didn't return it right away. He kept looking at it as he got into his car, as if the picture connected him to a part of his son he had never known. That night, he sat at his desk again, the photo beside a framed picture of his son. He looked between them for a long time, realizing how close those two children had been. He called his assistant and said quietly, "Find out everything you can about a boy living near the old bus station. His name is—" The next day, the report came in. The boy lived with his grandmother in a tiny, broken house. His parents had died years ago in an accident. The grandmother sold small things on the street, and the boy worked after school to help her. They were behind on rent. Sometimes they went days without enough food. The billionaire closed the file slowly, his hands trembling slightly. It wasn't just sympathy he felt, it was guilt. His own son had lived in comfort, while his best friend struggled to survive. The following morning he went to see them, but not in his car. He dressed simply and walked through the narrow streets until he found the small house made of tin and wood. From the outside, it looked like it could fall apart at any moment. He saw the boy sitting on the steps, polishing an old pair of shoes with a cloth, humming softly to himself. The man didn't say anything right away. He just watched. The boy's movements were quick but careful, his focus deep. Every few minutes, he'd look up at his grandmother, who sat inside, coughing softly. Finally, the man stepped closer. The boy looked up in surprise. "Sir, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to see where you live," the man said gently. "You didn't tell me it was this far." The boy smiled shyly. "It's okay, sir. We like it here. It's home." The grandmother came to the door, leaning on her stick. She was thin, her eyes kind but tired. "Who's this child?" she asked. "This is the man I told you about," the boy said softly. "The one whose son was my friend." The old woman's expression softened. "God bless your son, sir. He was a good boy." The man bowed his head slightly. "Thank you, ma'am." He wanted to offer them money, help, something, but he could tell they were proud people. So instead he said, "If you ever need anything, please let me know." The grandmother smiled faintly. "We'll be fine, sir. As long as he keeps studying, that's enough for me." The man left after a short while, but his mind was full. As he walked back through the dusty streets, he made a silent promise to himself. He wouldn't interfere too much, but he would make sure they never went hungry again. That evening, he called his assistant again. "Send some groceries to that address," he said. "And make sure it looks like it came from a local charity." The assistant hesitated. "Should we tell them it's from you, sir?" "No," the man said quietly. "They don't need to know." That night, as he looked at his son's picture again, he whispered, "I met your friend today. You'd be proud of him. He's strong. Stronger than me, maybe." And somewhere deep inside, he felt something begin to heal. The friendship between those two boys had somehow created a bridge between the past and the present. The billionaire didn't know what destiny had planned next, but he knew one thing for sure: his life would never be the same again. The days passed, but the billionaire couldn't get the boy and his grandmother out of his mind. Something about them stayed with him, their quiet dignity, their warmth despite having so little. Every time he looked at his son's photograph, he thought about that child who still visited the grave each week, carrying wildflowers and stories from his little world. He had made sure the groceries reached them regularly, but he had instructed his assistant to do it carefully, never revealing who was behind it. The boy didn't need charity. He needed someone who understood him, who believed in him the way his son once had. One Saturday afternoon, the billionaire told his driver to take a different route. "No car today," he said. "Drop me 2 streets before the boy's house." The driver looked surprised but nodded. The billionaire walked quietly down the narrow lane, where small houses leaned against each other like tired people. The air smelled of dust and cooking smoke. Children ran barefoot, chasing an old tire, laughing. Life there was hard, yet full of small moments of joy. When he reached the house, he saw the boy sitting outside, fixing a torn sandal with a needle and thread. His grandmother was resting on a chair nearby, coughing softly. The billionaire waited until the boy noticed him. When he did, his eyes widened. "Sir, you came again. I told you I would," the man said with a small smile. "You didn't come to the grave this week." The boy lowered his head. "I wanted to, sir, but my grandmother wasn't feeling well. I couldn't leave her alone." The man's eyes softened. "Is she better now?" "She's trying to be," the boy said. "The medicine helps, but it's expensive. Sometimes we just buy half the dose and make it last longer." The billionaire felt a sharp ache in his chest. He wanted to say something, to offer help openly, but he didn't want to hurt their pride. So he said quietly, "You're a good grandson. Your friend would be proud of you." The boy smiled faintly. "He always told me to look after people I love." The man sat down beside him on the steps, something he hadn't done in years, sitting so close to the ground next to a child. He looked around. The house was small, with cracks in the walls and a tin roof patched in places with cardboard. A few plants grew in tin cans near the door. There was little, but everything was clean and cared for. The boy's grandmother came out slowly, leaning on her stick. She greeted the man with a warm smile. "You again, sir. You shouldn't trouble yourself coming here." "It's no trouble," the man replied. "I was just nearby." She nodded politely, but her eyes were full of gratitude. Somehow she had guessed he was the one sending groceries, even if no one said it aloud. The boy offered the man a glass of water. "It's all we have, sir." "Sorry it's not cold." The man took it with a smile. "It's perfect." They talked for a while about school and life. The boy told him about his dream to become an engineer one day. He said his late friend used to tell him that he was smart enough to build anything if he studied hard. The billionaire listened quietly, realizing how his son's kindness had left a mark that outlived him. After a while, the boy picked up his shoe-shining box. "I have to go to the market now," he said. "If I get a few customers, we can buy food for tomorrow." The man stood up. "Can I come with you?" The boy laughed softly. "You in the market? People will think something's wrong." The man smiled. "Let them. I just want to see where you work." So they walked together through the busy streets. The market was crowded, vendors shouting, children running, the smell of roasted corn in the air. The boy found a small corner near the bus stop and sat down. His tools were simple: a few brushes, polish, and an old rag. He called out to people politely, offering to clean their shoes. Some ignored him, some stopped. The billionaire stood at a distance watching. Each time the boy finished a pair, he bowed his head and thanked the customer. It was clear he wasn't doing it out of habit. He truly respected every coin he earned. When a man roughly refused him and pushed past, the billionaire felt anger rise in his chest. But the boy just smiled and said softly, "It's okay. Maybe he's having a bad day." That simple line made the billionaire pause. In his own world of business and power, people didn't forgive small slights. They held grudges, planned revenge. Yet this child, living on almost nothing, carried no bitterness at all. As the sun began to set, the boy gathered his things. He had earned only a few coins that day. The man quietly slipped a folded note under one of the brushes while pretending to help pack up. The boy didn't notice until later. On their way back, the boy stopped at a fruit stall and bought a small mango for his grandmother. "She likes these," he said with a proud smile. "We can share it tonight." The billionaire's throat tightened again. How could a child have such a generous heart when life had given him so little? That night, the billionaire couldn't sleep. He walked into his son's room, which had remained untouched since the day he died. The books, trophies, and photos were still where they'd always been. He sat on the bed and whispered, "You had good taste in friends, my boy. You chose someone with the kind of heart I wish I had." The next morning, he made a quiet decision. He called his lawyer and asked him to start a small scholarship fund for poor students in his son's name. He didn't mention the boy directly, but he made sure the boy's school was one of the first to receive the funds. Days turned into weeks, and their bond grew naturally. Every Thursday, the boy came to the grave, and the man was always there, waiting. They talked about school, about life, and sometimes about the son who had brought them together. The boy never asked for help, and the man never pushed it. But behind the scenes, he made sure their rent was paid on time, that the grandmother's medicine arrived regularly, and that the boy's school fees were covered quietly. One evening, as the sun was setting, the boy came running up the hill to the grave, waving a paper in his hand. "Sir, I passed my exams," he shouted with joy. The man smiled, pride glowing in his eyes. "I knew you would. I even got the highest marks in science," the boy said proudly. "The teacher said I can apply for a city scholarship next year." The man's eyes softened. "That's wonderful. You've made your friend proud today." The boy placed the paper gently beside the grave. "I told him I'd do it," he said. "He always believed I could." The billionaire felt his eyes burn with tears he couldn't hold back. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was something deeper, something like peace mixed with love. Over the next few weeks, he began visiting the boy's home more often. The grandmother, though weak, would always greet him warmly. Sometimes she'd cook a simple meal and insist he eat with them. It had been years since he'd shared food made with such care. There was no fancy silverware, no expensive dishes, just kindness served quietly on old plates. One afternoon, when the grandmother was resting, the man noticed the boy sitting near her bed, reading aloud from a book. The boy's voice was soft but full of life. He read stories of hope, of people who rose from nothing and changed their lives through courage. The billionaire listened from the doorway, feeling something stir deep inside him. He realized the boy didn't need pity, he needed opportunity. He needed someone to believe in him the way his son once had. Before leaving, he placed an envelope on the small table. It wasn't money this time, but a letter from the principal of a private academy offering the boy a scholarship. He had arranged it quietly through his connections. When the boy found it later that night, he couldn't believe his eyes. "Grandma, look," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. "They're giving me a full scholarship. I can study there for free." The old woman's eyes filled with tears. "God sends people when you need them most," she whispered. The boy didn't know who had done it, but in his heart he had a feeling. The next morning, when he met the billionaire at the cemetery, he didn't say anything. He just handed him a flower and said softly, "Thank you for everything, sir." The man looked at him, pretending not to understand. "For what?" "For believing that some people are worth helping," the boy said. The man smiled faintly but didn't reply. He looked up at the sky, feeling his son's presence in the warm wind that brushed against them. In that quiet moment, something unspoken passed between them, a bond that needed no words. The boy had given him a reason to care again, and he had given the boy hope for a better future. Neither of them knew it yet, but this connection would soon be tested in ways that would change both their lives forever. The days rolled by quietly after that evening, when the man had decided to help the boy and his grandmother from a distance. He didn't want them to feel like they owed him anything, and he didn't want the boy's pride to be hurt. So he kept everything a secret. Every week he asked his assistant to send groceries to their doorstep, pay their rent, and make sure the grandmother's medicines were always available. The boy didn't know who was behind it. All he knew was that life had suddenly become a little easier, and for the first time in a long time his grandmother could sleep peacefully at night. Still, the man couldn't stop thinking about them. He often sat alone in his study, looking at his son's old photos. His son's laughter seemed to echo in those empty halls. The boy reminded him so much of his son, not by appearance but by heart. The kindness, the humility, the way he cared for others even when he had nothing for himself. It made the man realize how far he had drifted from the world his son once loved. One evening, the man decided to visit the small house again, just to see how they were doing. He stayed inside his car, watching from a distance. The lights were dim, and he could see the boy helping his grandmother eat dinner. He served her with so much care that it made the man's chest tighten. After she finished, the boy washed the dishes, then sat beside her and read from an old storybook. They laughed quietly together. It wasn't a rich home, but it was full of warmth, something the man hadn't felt in his mansion for years. Later that night, the boy stepped outside, looking up at the stars. He whispered something, maybe a prayer or a message, to his lost friend. The man's eyes softened. He didn't get out of the car. He just sat there, feeling a mix of sadness and peace. Then he drove away slowly, the boy's image lingering in his mind. Days turned into weeks, and soon months passed. Everything seemed fine until one afternoon when the man received a call from his assistant. The grandmother had been taken to the hospital. Her health had suddenly worsened, and the boy was alone trying to manage everything. The man didn't think twice. He rushed straight to the hospital. When he arrived, he saw the boy sitting on a bench outside the emergency room holding his grandmother's handkerchief. His eyes were swollen from crying, his clothes were dusty, and his hands were trembling. The man walked over quietly and sat beside him. The boy looked up, surprised to see him there. "I heard she's not well," the man said gently. "I came as soon as I could." The boy didn't speak at first. He just nodded. Then after a moment he whispered, "They said she needs surgery, but I don't have the money. I don't know what to do." The man placed his hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything." The boy's lips parted, shocked. "But why would you do that for me?" The man looked into his eyes and replied softly, "Because someone very dear to me would have done the same." Without another word, he went to the counter, signed the forms, and paid for everything. He made sure the best doctors attended to her. The boy watched, his heart filled with gratitude but also confusion. He didn't understand why this rich man cared so much. Through the night, the man stayed in the hospital with the boy. He brought him food, made him rest, and talked to him like he was his own child. In those hours, the walls between them disappeared. The boy shared stories of his grandmother, how she used to make him laugh, how she sacrificed everything for him, how she told him to always be kind no matter what. The man listened quietly, sometimes nodding, sometimes just staring into the distance. When the boy fell asleep on the hospital chair, the man got up and walked over to the window. The city lights sparkled in the distance. For the first time in many years, he felt something alive inside him again, something that had been buried with his son. But fate can be cruel even to the kindest hearts. A few days later, the doctors told him that the grandmother's condition was not improving. She was too weak. The man felt a lump in his throat as he looked at the boy sitting beside her bed, holding her hand tightly. He wanted to say something, but no words came out. That night, the grandmother opened her eyes slowly and saw the man standing there. She smiled faintly and said in a weak voice, "I know it's you who's been helping us. I recognize your face. You used to be in the newspapers all the time." The man hesitated, then nodded. "I didn't want to embarrass you. I just wanted to help." She smiled again, her eyes soft but filled with wisdom. "You've done more than help, sir. You gave my grandson hope. But promise me one thing, don't let him lose his heart. He's a good boy." Her voice faded as she looked toward the boy. "Take care of him," she whispered, and her hand slowly slipped from his. The boy broke down, his cries filling the quiet hospital room. The man stood there frozen, unable to move, feeling the same pain he had once felt when his own son was taken away. He walked over and gently placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Grief connected them in silence. The funeral was simple but peaceful. The man made sure everything was arranged with dignity. The boy stood quietly beside the grave, holding a small flower, the same kind he used to place on his friend's grave. When the ceremony ended, he turned to the man and said softly, "Thank you for everything. I don't know how to repay you." The man shook his head. "You don't have to repay me. Just live a good life. That's all I ask." After that day, the boy had nowhere to go. The small house was gone and he had no family left. The man didn't hesitate. He took him home. The mansion that once felt so empty now had a new heartbeat. The servants were surprised to see the boy living there, but the man didn't care what anyone thought. The boy helped around the house, went back to school, and started studying with determination. The man often sat with him at dinner, listening to his stories, asking about his day, helping him with homework. Slowly, the silence that had once filled the mansion began to fade. Sometimes they would sit together in the garden, talking about the man's son. The boy would listen with quiet respect, asking questions about what kind of person he was, what he liked, and what he dreamed of. The man would smile softly, saying, "You remind me of him, not because of how you look, but because of how you care." Over time, the boy became like family. The man took him to visit his son's grave, and together they placed flowers there, one from the man, one from the boy. The man whispered softly, "I think you sent him to me, my son. Maybe you knew I still needed someone to care for." The boy didn't say anything, but his eyes filled with tears. He felt as though he had found something he never had before, not just a home, but a place where his heart belonged. As months passed, the man began new projects in memory of his son and the boy's grandmother. He built schools and started programs to help poor children. The boy was always beside him, learning, helping, and sharing ideas. The man often said, "You've given me a second chance, not just to be kind, but to be a father again." The world saw a powerful billionaire, but inside, he was just a man who had lost too much and was finally finding peace again. And the boy, who once had nothing, now had someone who cared deeply for him, not for pity, but for love. The bond they shared grew stronger each day. It wasn't about wealth or charity anymore. It was about connection, the kind that only pain and compassion can build. Together, they healed each other in ways neither had expected, and somewhere, in the quiet corners of heaven, maybe two souls, a lost son and a loving grandmother, smiled, knowing that their love had brought two broken hearts together. Years went by quietly, and the bond between the man and the boy only grew stronger. What began as an act of kindness had turned into something much deeper, a relationship that neither of them could have expected. The boy was no longer the scared, hungry child who used to sit outside a grave with a handmade flower. He had become a confident young man, full of dreams, determination, and gratitude, and the man who had once lived behind walls of sorrow had learned to smile again. Every morning, the mansion that once echoed with silence was now filled with life. The boy would often join the man for breakfast, sharing stories about school and the new community projects they were running together. The man listened with pride. He had always been successful in business, but now he felt he was finally doing something meaningful, something his late son would have been proud of. They had started a small foundation in memory of his son and the boy's grandmother. What began as a modest effort to help a few children soon grew into something bigger. Schools were being built in rural areas, scholarships were offered to students, and families struggling to survive were given support. The boy worked tirelessly, traveling to villages, talking to people, and understanding their needs. He never acted like someone above them. He always remembered where he came from. The man often accompanied him, watching quietly as the boy spoke to children with kindness and warmth. He saw reflections of his son in those moments, the same gentle nature, the same passion to make others smile. Sometimes when the boy wasn't looking, the man would whisper softly, "You'd be proud of him, my son. He's carrying your heart forward." As time passed, the boy completed his education. On his graduation day, the man sat in the audience, his eyes shining with pride. When the boy walked onto the stage to receive his certificate, everyone stood and clapped. The man's hands trembled as he applauded, remembering the first day he saw that same boy barefoot at his son's grave. It felt like life had come full circle. After the ceremony, the boy walked over and hugged him tightly. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said softly. The man smiled and replied, "No, my boy. You did it with your heart. I only gave you the chance." They returned home that evening and sat in the garden where they often talked. The sky was turning orange and the wind carried the scent of blooming flowers. The man looked at him and said, "You've grown into someone my son would have called a brother. I'm proud of you." The boy looked down, his eyes moist. "You gave me more than I ever asked for," he whispered. "You gave me a family when I had none." From that day, the boy became more than just a helper or a student. He became a true partner in everything the man did. Together, they expanded the foundation, opening learning centers, health camps, and programs for children who couldn't afford school. The boy handled the work on the ground, while the man managed the funding and planning. They complemented each other perfectly, but with time, the man's health began to weaken. He didn't talk about it much, but the boy noticed. He would sometimes see the man sitting quietly in his study, staring at old photographs. One evening, the boy found him there, holding a framed picture of his late son. "Do you still miss him?" The boy asked softly. The man nodded. "Every single day. But when I see you, I feel he's still with me somehow. You brought back the light he left behind." The boy didn't know what to say. He just sat beside him in silence. After a while, the man smiled faintly and said, "Promise me something. Promise that no matter what happens, you'll keep helping others. That's how you'll honor both him and your grandmother." The boy held his hand and nodded. "I promise." The man's eyes softened. "That's all I need to hear." The following year was filled with progress and joy. The foundation grew internationally, and people started recognizing their efforts. The boy became known for his compassion and honesty. Reporters often tried to interview him, but he always gave credit to the man. "He's the one who taught me everything," he would say. "Without him, I wouldn't be here." The man would always laugh when he saw those interviews. "You make me sound like a hero," he'd say. The boy would reply with a smile, "That's because you are one." One evening they visited the cemetery together, as they did every year. The sun was setting and the golden light fell softly on the gravestones. They stood before the man's son's grave, both carrying white flowers. The boy knelt first, placing his flower carefully and whispering a short prayer. Then the man placed his flower beside it and said quietly, "You see, my son, I kept my promise. I took care of your friend and he took care of me." For a long time they stood there in silence, the wind gently brushing against their faces. It wasn't sadness anymore, it was peace. As they walked back to the car, the man suddenly stopped and looked at the boy. "You know," he said softly, "the day I found you here was the day my life began again. I thought I came to visit my son, but maybe it was my son who brought me here to find you."